John 6:51. Here Jesus says, I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I shall give is my flesh, which I shall give for the life of the world. Now, as Jesus rested in the tomb, He was the living manna, right? The manna represented His what? His flesh. The flesh of Jesus rests in the tomb. Now, here's my question. What would have happened with a normal body that was buried on Friday? It would begin the process of what? Of decomposing. And eventually it would breed worms and it would what? And it would stink. Did that happen with the body of Jesus? What is it that happened with the manna when it was picked up on Friday for Sabbath? It was just as fresh on Sabbath as it had been on Friday. And the manna represents the flesh of Jesus. Was the flesh of Jesus all day Sabbath as fresh as when He was placed in the tomb on Friday? I'm going to prove it from the Bible. God is teaching here the observance of the Sabbath in honor of redemption. Notice what we find in Acts chapter 2 and verses 25 through 27. Acts chapter 2 and let's go first of all to the Messianic prophecy, and then we'll go to Acts 2. The prophecy that is found in Acts 2 is in Psalm 16, verses 8 through 10. I want to read the prophecy first. It says here in Psalm 16 and verses 8 through 10, I have set the Lord always before me. Because He is at my right hand, I will not be shaken. And I'm reading from the NIV because it's a better translation. Therefore my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. Here Jesus is speaking prophetically 1,000 years before He is actually born. He's telling His experience, what is going to happen. Now notice what He says. I've set the Lord always before me. Because He is at my right hand, I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My body, actually that is not a good translation. There's a word for body in Greek. It's the word soma. This is the same word flesh that is used in John 6 and verse 51. It's the word sarx. The NIV mistranslates that word. So really it is, therefore my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My flesh also will rest secure. What does Jesus say about His flesh? His flesh will what? His flesh will rest secure. Where is it going to rest? In the tomb. You say, how do we know that? Well, let's read the next verse. Because you will not abandon me to what? To the grave. Nor will you let your Holy One see what? See decay. To whom did Psalm 16 point? It pointed to the flesh of Jesus Christ. Did the body of Jesus Christ decompose in the grave? It did not, because Jesus was the living manna. Are you following me? Now, let's go to Acts chapter 2, verses 29 to 33. And once again, I'm reading in the NIV. Here Peter is preaching on the day of Pentecost. And he's going to explain Psalm 16, verses 8 through 10. Because you might say, well, how do you know that Psalm 16 is talking about Jesus? Well, Peter says so, inspired by God's Holy Spirit. Notice Acts 2, and let's begin reading at verse 29, and we'll go through verse 33. Peter says here, brothers, I can tell you confidently that the patriarch David died and was buried, and his tomb is here to this day. In other words, this psalm was not talking about David because his tomb is here and he's dead. Notice verse 30. But he was a prophet. David was a prophet. And knew that God had promised on oath that He would place one of His descendants on His throne. Seeing what was ahead, he spoke of what? Of the resurrection of the Christ. That He was not abandoned to the grave, nor did His body, once again it should be the word flesh, nor did His flesh see what? Decay. God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of the fact. Exalted to the right hand of God, He has received from the Father the promised Holy Spirit and has poured out what you now see and hear. Isn't this a magnificent Bible prophecy? It was prophesying that Jesus, the manna, would die on Friday. On Sabbath, he would remain in the tomb all day, and his body, like the manna, would not begin the process of breeding worms and stinking, because he was what the manna represented. In other words, this is not only telling us that we keep the Sabbath, it's telling us that Jesus kept the Sabbath by resting in the tomb on the Sabbath, and those who were outside also should have been resting, understanding fully what Jesus was doing. He should have been resting inside while they rested outside, understanding what Jesus had accomplished.